Hi, I'm Rick Wilson, and for some reason, those dumb bastards let me have the show all by myself tonight. This is The Breakdown. Hey, I'm Rick Wilson. Welcome to The Breakdown. Tara is off tonight because she is hosting The View this week, and she has been having a hell of a good time over there, including stirring up a major hornet's nest today by correctly saying that the MAGAs, if the Republicans take back the House, that the MAGAs will not elect Kevin McCarthy as the speaker again. It will be someone else, probably named Jim Jordan. So, but we've been enjoying having Tara on The View as always because she's a tremendous guest over there. We look forward to having her back next Tuesday. But in the meantime, we have got tonight a special guest is David Coale. He's a lawyer and federal courts expert. He's going to talk to us a little bit about the crisis of legitimacy we're having with the Supreme Court right now, especially regarding the Clarence and Ginni Thomas matter. It's going to be a fascinating segment. I'm really looking forward to it. And just before that segment, you guys are going to get a world premiere of a new ad coming out on that very topic. No one knows about it yet. You guys are gonna be the first to see it. So listen, a couple stories that were on my radar screen today that I thought were really interesting. First off, I want to give a shout out to Chef Jose Andres, who is doing a tremendous job with World Kitchen in Ukraine. They are feeding refugees. They are feeding the Ukrainian people. He is now in the city of Kyiv, and it's something. A lot of times, there's a lot of like grim news around us and in the world and on this show. He is a real light out there. And I really want to just give him a quick shout out and salute him because he is just an amazing human being doing amazing work. And World Kitchen is an organization that deserves your help and support. Speaking of Ukraine, one of the great things that we're seeing coming out of Ukraine right now, aside from the Russians finding themselves in a position where they've now been encircled, they're being pushed out of towns like Irpin, they're being chased toward the border. The Ukrainians have wisely made the Russians retreat under fire. Is that it turns out, and you'll be shocked to hear this, that Putin's own military and intelligence advisors have been feeding him, I think, what is technically termed in the military intelligence world as a line of horseshit. They've been telling him the war is going great. He's not seeing the real data. He's not seeing the real facts. He's living in his own information bubble, which is what a lot of authoritarians do, where they believe that they are the tallest, handsomest, smartest person in the room because everyone always tells them that. And so these people that are disappearing from his leadership structure are doing so in part because they're trying to bring in the bad news. And the bad news is that for all of Russia's unbelievable cruelty and violence and horror that they're deploying into Ukraine, they're losing. The Russian military is losing. They've lost a meaningful fraction of their best and newest model tanks. They've probably now either killed or injured, have probably 60,000 of their troops killed or injured. And they're no longer combat effective, except on long-range standoff stuff like artillery and bombing. So Putin's very disappointed to hear that. And I got to tell you, that information bubble he's living in is going to cost him. It cost Adolf Hitler in World War II. It has cost previous Russian leaders. It's cost American presidents who live in their own information bubbles from time to time as well, and not just Donald Trump. LBJ and Nixon both got in their own bubbles, and they found themselves in political crisis and in trouble. And so I think you're going to find that this doesn't pay off. This is what authoritarian regimes do, is they are always fighting with each other internally. They're always trying to kill each other off internally. And so you're gonna end up with the yes men are going to keep getting an audience, and the people who say, wait a minute, boss, you can't do that. It's illegal. It's wrong. It's not going to work. They're the ones who get thrown out in Siberia, in some cases now, literally to Siberia. So speaking of information bubbles, I want to talk about an information bubble in American life, in media and politics for a second, that had a shining example of how broken it is. There are a lot of good people at CBS. There are a lot of tremendous, amazing journalists and reporters at CBS. A lot. It's a great organization. Okay. But this week they announced they were hiring Mick Mulvaney. Mick Mulvaney, one of the architects of Trump, one of the enablers of Donald Trump, one of the people inside the Trump White House during scandal after scandal and crisis after crisis. He was always one of the yes men. He was always one of the guys in the room saying, Donald, you're the smartest, handsomest, tallest person in America. You're the richest man ever. You're so good looking and so brilliant. Donald, you can do nothing wrong. Your farts smell like honeysuckle and rainbows. And because Mulvaney was an ass kisser of the highest order, he stuck around until he made a few mistakes and left. Well, now CBS is hiring him as a political analyst. For the life of me, I have never found a better representative case of the flaws in Washington's political media ecosystem. And I'll tell you why. I don't live in Washington. I moved the hell out of there a long time ago. I went to school there. I worked there for a long time. I'm in Washington less than I used to be. But here's the thing. The culture of Washington, politics and media, you'll be shocked to know whether you're on the left or the right, is essentially professional wrestling. They all go to Cafe Milano. They all go out to restaurants. They all see each other. It's a small town. It is not the Georgetown cocktail party circuit thing that the right-wingers so constantly berate, but it is a small culture. And the Republicans have learned very, very adeptly to play the refs. Hey, come on, I have to do that because it's Trump. I'm trying to steer the ship, trying to do my best behind the scenes. Well, that means reporters and media people think it's a game. It's not a game when you're part of an administration that puts kids in cages. It's not a game when you're part of an administration that begs Russians for help. It's not a game when you're part of an administration that deliberately prevents testing from going to red states as COVID is, or blue states as COVID is roaring. It's not a game when you're an administration that is overtly corrupt at every level. It's not a game when you're part of an administration that tried to overturn a free, fair, and small d democratic election. So hiring Mick Mulvaney is a symbol and a sign that the folks at CBS, and again, there are great journalists at CBS. There are a lot of good journalists at CBS. They do some amazing programming. But they've made a mistake, in my view, in hiring this guy because he's not a friend. He's not going to bring insight to them. He's not going to provide any access to Donald Trump or secret thinking or any sort of esoteric knowledge of the Trump world to them. What he's going to do is what every person around Trump does: constantly try to shape the message and the reality around it to please the dear leader. Everyone around Trump, they can only go down on the ratchet. They can stay in place or they can go down. You never rise unless you're Ivanka. Mulvaney will go on the air. He will lie, he will lie, and he will lie, and he will lie, and he will lie. Every time he is on the air, he will lie. He will tell America that Donald Trump was a good president or a wise president or a smart president or a compassionate president or a normal president or a good president. It will always be a lie. They will ask him, was 1-6, was that an insurrection? Did Trump have anything to do with that? No, he'll say no. And he will go through chapter and verse and lie to the American people as he has done since he left. He's not even going to be one of these like Johnny come lately, I've seen the light, oh, I'm reformed now guys. He's going to stick to the line. He's going to hold the line because they're all afraid of Trump. They all think he's coming back. They all live in absolute terror of his mob and his horde. And that's why I think it's a big mistake for CBS to do this. And I have to say, it is disappointing because it shows that a lot of folks in the media have not figured out, they do not understand that the people they put on the air to represent Trump, they're not just representing a Trump movement. They're representing a movement of people who, if they were in power, would rip the First Amendment protections of the press into tiny little bits. Donald Trump himself used to always talk about, I want to change all the libel laws and change all the slander laws. He wants them to look more like the British version of libel laws, which means the press gets sued all the time. They have to tiptoe around every issue. There's a constant state of fear that you're gonna libel someone if you're a media outlet. He wants that world at the least, and maybe more. And certainly his people don't believe that any kind of journalism doesn't reflect the Fox Facebook bubble should be allowed or permitted. So it is a disappointment. I think it is a mistake. I think Mick Mulvaney, you can start the clock on the time of his first appearance as a paid contributor for when he starts lying. And it will never, ever, ever stop. Okay, moving on from that, we have a couple of other headlines that have been sort of obsessing me today. One thing I think that the Biden administration has made a very good move on, it is an economic power move, was that he has decided he's going to release oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve at a pace that will actually make a difference in the market. They're going to actually put it into the market. I also think they're contemplating this. I don't know if they've announced this yet. They are contemplating telling American energy producers, use it or lose it on your leases. There are a lot of energy producers in this country right now who have drilling leases where they could go drill. They're not doing it. And why aren't they doing it? Because their idea of capitalism in this fairly closed market of theirs is that they're going to exploit this crisis and they're going to jack prices up as high as they can, as long as they can. Now, if Biden puts that use or lose thing into the leases, I think there's going to be some fire under people a little bit. And I will say this: if the energy market was a free market, we'd be having a different discussion, but it's not. It is a cartel-controlled oligopoly in a lot of different places and ways. So I am at this point, for the good of the nation and for the good of the world, very much in favor of Biden opening the SPR and getting moving on this. I think it's an absolutely smart move on his part. And I think it's something that it shows that the White House is starting to get it in terms of the impact of energy prices in this country on basic voter behavior. It will have an impact. You know, if he doesn't do anything, this could help. I'm looking forward to seeing how quickly they can deploy it. And I do think there are some market signals that they can also send to the oil and gas industry to let them know just how serious they are, such as those lease things. Now, the last headline I want to talk about a little bit, and we're going to be coming back to this a lot, as the Democrats should. I beg of you, no matter how heinous you think, don't say gay and the voting restrictions and a bunch of these other things are. The Democrats have been handed a sword to cut off Senate candidates' heads by Mr. Rick Scott, the wealthiest man in the Senate, a guy who has faced the largest federal fraud charges in history when he was the head of the HCA, and who is a guy who's always bought his way out of every political problem. He bought a problem this week for the Republicans that it's made Mitch McConnell nervous. It's making Republican candidates nervous. Democrats need to pay attention to this and get on this issue. Rick Scott is saying that his plan, and by the way, Rick Scott has ambitions to replace Mitch McConnell. He's running the Senate campaigns. He has a lot to say here. He has a lot of power here. Rick Scott's plan is to raise taxes on every American. A lot. Rick Scott's plan will have a demonstrable, and you know, Democrats used to always say they're going to throw Granny off the cliff. This is really now into throwing Granny off the cliff territory. They're going to tax the Social Security incomes of seniors. They're going to tax low-income families. Rick Scott says, oh, they need skin in the game. Let me tell you what skin in the game is, Rick. Skin in the game is a working mom who gets her ass out of bed at 5:45 in the morning, gets her kid to school at 6:15, goes out to her first job, comes home, picks her kid up from school, drives the kid home, changes, and goes to her second job. That's skin in the fucking game, Rick. These people have, and look, I say this to you guys as a free market economic conservative. And the system we have now is not. The system we have now rewards economic behavior that is derived from one set of factors. Who has the most powerful set of lobbyists? Who makes the right donations to the right members of Congress and the Senate? Who gets their way when it comes down to engineering these bills and these regulations? That's the system we have now. Rick Scott wants people to have skin in the game. Well, then we need to flatten it out, and we need to rip the shit out of all these corporate write-outs and all these things, these regulatory and tax exceptions and whatnot. That is a headline that I think we guys really need to focus on a little bit. We're going to be talking about that a lot in the next week or so. And we're going to be making Republicans own the fact that Rick Scott, the leader of their Senate committee who controls their money, is telling us right now the Senate's agenda will be to pass a massive tax cut on every American who isn't like Rick Scott. Anyway, I've got to turn this phone off now because it's pinging at me. You'd be shocked to hear my phones ping all the time. Okay, folks. Now, a lot of you have been concerned about Clarence and Ginni Thomas. You are right to be concerned. This is an actual issue that I think is hurting the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. It is harming the legacy of Clarence Thomas, whether you agree with it or not. Clarence Thomas has been on the court for decades now. He is a consequential, whether you agree with him or not, he's a consequential conservative legal theorist and voice. He has had a major impact on the direction of the court. But right now, his reputation has become profoundly compromised because when it came down to the court getting the information about the 1-6 plot, the conspiracy, of which she is at least tangentially and from what we can see so far, meaningfully involved. When he wrote out the single dissenting opinion on that, it said something to America. And now that we know about Ginni Thomas's text messages and her activism and her attempts to get the White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, to help overturn the election, to take steps to overturn the election of 2020, this is a four-alarm fire. So we have a new Lincoln Project ad I'd like to show you that is going to be, there will be a 60-second version of this, but this is the intro version. This is the digital version. And let's go ahead and roll that, guys.
Justice Clarence Thomas is compromised. On January 19th, 2022, Thomas was the only Supreme Court justice willing to help Trump and his allies hide from justice over the January 6th insurrection. Thomas did not hide that he was willing to grant Trump's request for secrecy, but it wasn't just to protect Trump and his conspirators. It was to protect his wife, Ginni Thomas. A radical right-wing activist, Ginni Thomas has openly applauded rebellion in the past.
I think people are rebelling and there's a big tidal wave coming. I think the Democrats are pretty worried about what's coming.
And the lead up to January 6th was no different. Ginni Thomas used her direct line to Trump's White House to push for the overturning of a free and fair election, even attending the rally that would ultimately end in an attack on the U.S. Capitol. None of this would be known if Justice Thomas had gotten his way. The January 6th Commission can't do their job if one of the most powerful men in the country is using his seat to protect his best friend. Clarence Thomas must recuse himself because he took an oath to protect the Constitution, not his wife.
Before we bring in our guest, David Coale, who's going to talk more with us about the Ginni Thomas thing, wanted to throw one more headline at you folks tonight. I think it's remarkable that it takes Madison Cawthorn talking about real or imagined coke orgies in Washington and key bumps in Washington for Kevin McCarthy to finally stand up and try to discipline one of his members. There's only two things that can happen in this Republican caucus that will make Kevin McCarthy angry at you. If they are, talk about coke and sex orgies. Well, they're all orgies definitionally are sex, but talk about coke orgies. And then the other thing you can do is to call out Trump's behavior on 1-6. Because Kevin McCarthy has now vaguely, sort of, kind of slapped Madison Cawthorn on the wrist just a little bit. I've lost faith in him. Get out of here. But he's hosting and he's promoting primaries and fundraisers against Liz Cheney. And he said nothing and did nothing to try to keep Adam Kinzinger or any other Republican that said that 1-6 was not a legitimate tourist visit, but in fact, an insurrection. So it's striking to me just how corrupted Kevin is Although at this point, it shouldn't surprise me. There's no bottom there. He just keeps digging every time that he gets into these things. Madison, doesn't matter to him that Madison is a little white nationalist, a Hitler Eagles Nest fanboy, or a tree punching weirdo alt-righter. Oh no, but when you talk about the coke orgies, there you go. And as I said the other night, it's humiliation play and BDSM in DC. It's not the orgies. And I don't know if some of you really caught into that sort of thing, but it is one of the things that that Washington is a town where people engage in the rule. They believe that they're outside of their home bubble and they can do what they want. Anyway, let us move on to our guest tonight, David Coale. David, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I wanted to talk to you because you have been talking and thinking a lot about how this Clarence Thomas and Ginni Thomas brouhaha is affecting people's perceptions of the court. But first, I want to ask you, what's your 30,000-foot view of the ethics behind her husband covering for her in this very vital moment?
Well, the remarkable thing about it is that at the peak of the judicial branch, the 9 justices who make up the Supreme Court of the U.S., and your video just now, your commercial just showed the kind of scrutiny they get, the significance of their decisions. There are very few formal ethical guidelines. There is a general statute that governs every judge in the United States that says you shall be disqualified or shall recuse if, and lists a bunch of ifs, and then it ends and doesn't say what happens then. And some courts have filled that in. Most courts have filled that in with specific procedures. The Supreme Court has not. It's up to each individual justice to make their own personal decision. 99% of the time, as the court has rolled on, that's worked out okay. It's been something everybody can kind of live with and manage. But here we have this situation that is of enormous interest to the public, that's very troubling in the substance of what she was texting. And now we have a spotlight on that lack of formal regulation in the court and a lot of second guessing. Is this really the policy that we want to be having governing these very powerful individuals?
Right. And so the court's discipline is mostly internal, from what I understand. I mean, it's not really codified. It's not really, like you said, there's a federal statute, but apparently it's mostly handled by, quiet conversations rather than a rule book.
Yeah, you have on paper, you have a chief justice, so you have 9 associate justices. That make it sound like the chief is in charge, right? He's the chief, the others are associates, but that's just names. I mean, you have 9 individuals, very intelligent, very independent-minded, with life tenure. And, who's going to tell them what to do? And trying to form a consensus of all 9 of them to come up with some kind of rule or procedure. Well, I mean, you see how few 9-0 opinions there are from the Supreme Court. Imagine how you're trying to do that when you're governing yourself. It's just hard to do. You have 9, by design, independent thinkers on the court, and that's why it's difficult to govern that.
It was striking to me, I want to get your opinion on this. It was striking to me that he was the sole dissenting voice. I mean, in the case that brings together Sotomayor and Amy Coney Barrett, there's something there that makes it more telling, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it certainly is not a good look in hindsight. There's no question. But Justice Thomas has been on the court for 30 years, and he is no stranger to being the lone dissent. He's perhaps less so now than he used to be, but we're talking just a minute ago about independent thinkers. He's like way out there on independent thinker. He just doesn't care. 10 years went by, and he just didn't ask any questions. So if anyone was going to be of the 9, if you asked me who's it going to be, I would have said Justice Thomas, just because he has his own views about things. So that's the problem, though, when you get into this, is you have a guy who's famously independent. He dissents. That's not really that surprising. But then this sort of thing comes along, everybody starts guessing, and that's what creates the legitimacy issues that you mentioned at the beginning of your conversation there. Everybody starts wondering what else is going on. Not healthy for the court.
Yeah, I think that's where I want to go next on this is it strikes me that the court was always kind of a constant in the background, where conservatives might be unhappy when it was more liberal court, liberals might be unhappy when it was more conservative court, but there was not a basic fundamental sense of distress that the court had been corrupted or that it was like skating outside of ethical boundaries. It was ideological, not ethical. Do you think that the faith in the court is diminishing on both those axes, and how bad do you think it's gotten?
Yeah, I think of it as a bowl of soup. It's on the stove, and it's got two burners underneath it. And one of the burners is this Clarence Thomas situation that's kind of got everybody's focus on the ethical rules of the court. The other burner, which right now is off, but it's simmering, is the Dobbs case from the Fifth Circuit about whether or not Roe versus Wade is still good law. It's early April. That case is coming out in a couple of months. If the court does something that is perceived as overruling a longstanding precedent that's as well known as Roe, those burners are going to be on at the same time, and that would be unprecedented. The court has had lots of controversial decisions, and the court has had lots of issues that come up. Justice Scalia, duck hunting with Cheney, for example, that kind of thing. But the two together under a great deal of scrutiny is a very awkward position that the court is very much not used to, certainly in recent memory.
So what do you think the best outcome is with Ginni Thomas and the current court? I mean, it strikes me as a hard path to get back to that consensus in America that the court is, largely a functioning institution.
Certainly, you've got to do something about the burners. You've got to get the temperature down. And so on the January 6th one, these things come and this could just burn out. The January 6th committee might move on to other things. The civil litigation might fizzle. It might just be one of those things that raged hot for a couple of weeks, or it might continue to simmer. If it does, Justice Thomas really ought to say something. Just a very simple guideline about I intend to follow the rule, or here's something I intend to do. That's not unusual. A lot of judges have standing rules in place in other courts about when they recuse and when they don't recuse. Is that strictly required? Does he have to do that? No, but it would be a good idea to get that temperature down. Will he? I don't know. If he doesn't, then Chief Justice Roberts may need to kind of weigh in a little bit with some public statements of his own to kind of pull those, get that temperature down a little bit more. But that's unusual for the court to be in the public relations business, for sure.
They're not famously chatty about their internal management.
Right, and for example, we had this controversial case come out of Texas, the SB8 case about the so-called bounties.
Just going to ask you about that.
There was some clumsiness in the way the Supreme Court handled that. It was very expedited, very short opinions. The public approval ratings of the court went way down. And then you have Amy Coney Barrett standing next to Mitch McConnell saying we're not political. Bad look. I mean, the court's not very good at spin control. That's not what it was designed to do at its institution. That's not how you get a position on the Supreme Court. So if they find themselves doing that over and over again, they either need to hire a bunch of image consultants, or they need to stop, step back and get back in our lane. Say something legal sounding that at least gets the heat turned down so we can kind of get this back to a normal situation. Court's no stranger to controversy, just not all this controversy at once.
One of the things I'm interested in, that a lot of these laws in the states, like sort of, Texas and Florida in particular, are like ground zero in the culture war right now. And they're pushing through a lot of this legislation that seems to have a fair number of legal deficits, and it is fairly sloppy. Do you think there's any chance that the court ends up turning some of this down? Because like in Florida today, Judge Walker came out and said, all this voting rights restriction stuff you passed this year, not a chance. It's dead. Put the state back under VRA. Do you think there's a chance that the court will have an opportunity, or the lower courts will have an opportunity to sort of dial back the culture war parts of this? Because that second burner you're talking about with Roe and other things, I think the court may welcome having it tuned down a little bit.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of impulses to do that. The ideological makeup on all the circuit courts is a little different from court to court and different from the Supreme Court. The problem is with that the core ruling of the SB8 case, when it came back up on the merits again a couple of months ago, was about the scope of the U.S. Supreme Court case that lets you review state laws pre-enforcement, ex parte Young. If that case means this instead of this, there's only so much a federal court can do. Right. That's the vehicle they use. And so if that mechanism has been dialed back or limited as it appears to have been, well, you're going to have to go somewhere else other than the federal courts for relief. Maybe some state courthouses are going to get a lot busier, but that was a pretty big break on federal involvement.
I have told my Democratic friends for years, do not underestimate the amount of legal effort, resources, firepower, and intellect that is inside the Republican Party working on that one particular issue. and that it will never rest and never stop.
No, look, you talk about the draftsmanship quality. Whether you love or hate SB 8, the drafting is brilliant. It was a perfectly matched decades of case law about the scope of when federal courts can get involved in reviewing state laws, and it worked. The Supreme Court went along with it. So you have to salute the drafter for that.
Does that I think does open that door that people are talking about the last few days of some of these state laws that could come under review include things like mixed marriages and gay marriage in some of the states. And that I think is something that again, there's that culture war burner that could turn things into a very hot political question sooner than later.
Yes, and that's that burner is going to be affected in some sense politically, but in some sense, what the court says about Roe and Casey, even if it doesn't overrule them directly, and even if people out there don't think they're overruling them directly, you can describe the law in ways that invites the next challenge to go back and revisit some of these things.
Sure.
And then, of course, that goes beyond the academy, and people start arguing about that and trying to see what the next SB 8 will look like. That makes it challenging. The availability of the SB 8 mechanism, this private suit thing, definitely amps the heat up on that, because the Supreme Court and the federal courts are going to have to change a little law to get re-involved if they want to.
For sure. Well, David, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. You have been very enlightening. David Coale, folks, he is a legal and court expert. He is also the host of the Coale Mind podcast. That's COALEMIND podcast. A great pun, however.
There you go.
Thank you so much, David. And
thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Smart guys. I love having smart people on the show, and we often do. And that's one of the great things about this. And I want to go ahead and we're going to wrap the show up here in the next few minutes. You saw one thing nobody else has seen tonight, but here is the wrap-up ad for our Final Four in the MAGA Madness. We're down to the Final Two now in MAGA Madness. And I want to go ahead and play that, and we will go and wrap the show up for the evening. Wish you all the best. We'll see you next Tuesday when Tara will be back, and we will have some more fun next week, and we will be talking about Rick Scott's and Mitch McConnell's giant tax increase.
The MAGA Final Four is set after a bitter and often deranged battle to this point. Who moves to the title game? Whose convoy will show up in support? Whose house? MAGA's house. And now four stand out. The best of those who play the worst, all operating well below the rim. When they go low, we're like, damn, they really went there. But here they are, and the competition is fierce. The first semifinal pits actual elected Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene versus Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Three names dominated the Colt 45 region. She knocked off Ohio's Josh Mandel in her opener before disbarring Rudy Four Seasons Giuliani and easily dismissing Venmo user Matt Gaetz and State of the Union decorum violator Lauren Boebert. Three names is up against Mitch McConnell. The veteran has lost a step, but always relies on his worst instincts, as he displayed in easy wins over Lindsey Graham, Russia Ron Johnson, and Sarah Huckabee, the Duchess of Arkansas. Mitch will likely waddle the ball up the court, but Marge is a real sniper, and she constantly dunks on herself. That's enough to make her the true leader of the Republican Party. And with Russian bot support, too much for old Mitch to stay with. The second semi features CIA reject Tucker Swanson McNair Carlson, repping the outraged machine region. He mowed through Glenn Beck, Alex Jones, and Sean Hannity to face off next against first ballot Hall of Fame least like humans ever Ted Cruz. He picked up wins in the Trump wannabes region over Mike Pompeo and a pair of elite MAGA governors in Greg Abbott and Ron Tater DeSantis. Tucker remains the offshore betting favorite to take it all. He's rooting for Putin 5 nights a week on your least favorite uncle's TV channel. This semi, however, could be handed to Carlson by forfeit, as Cruz has a long history of fleeing in the face of a challenge. It's a horrible and horribly talented Final Four, and on paper it appears MTG and Tucker will move forward to face off, with Tucker likely cutting down the title nets while shredding the Constitution just for fun. It's a horrific race to the bottom, and these Final Four players have certainly f***ed around enough to find out how one shimmering moment can be theirs. It sounds terrible, the whole thing.